Okay, you APUSHers out there. This is Mr. B with them Chapter 18 notes. Gotta get that knowledge. This one is called The Growth of Cities and American Culture. This is during the Gilded Age. The growth of cities is also known as urbanization. Urbanization means the growth of cities. A lot of people are coming to the cities. 16.2 million people came to the United States during the Gilded Age, mostly from Eastern and Southern Europe. People like the Slovaks, the Poles, and the Italians. People were also coming, especially in the early, mid 1850s. The Chinese were coming until the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was to exclude Chinese people. It was mostly for jobs, but also a little bit for racism. All right, push factors. Why were people coming to America? No, why were they leaving Europe or their homelands? 1. Poverty of farm workers. 2. Overcrowding and joblessness in the cities. 3. Religious persecution, especially the Jews who were leaving Poland. Pull factors. Why would they come to the United States after they had to leave us? Number 1. Political and religious freedom. One of the chief characteristics of, or the American ideals. 2. Economic opportunity. Another one of the basic ideals of what America stands for. 3. Steamships and cheap one-way passage in ships called steerage made it affordable so that the poor immigrants could actually make it across. American letters. Immigrants already in the United States would encourage others to come and even help pay their way, like we saw in Spot Shop Girl. The old immigrants versus the new immigrants. Prior to the Civil War in antebellum America, was the first wave of immigration. The old immigrations were from Northern and Western Europe. Most of them were Protestants, although there were some Catholics. The Irish were Catholics. That's why they got discriminated against a lot. They learned the Irish people could speak English. The Germans were very literate, and this made it easy for them to assimilate and blend in, even though they did face some discrimination. New immigration. The new immigration is Southern and Eastern Europe. The Italians, the Slovaks, the Poles. They're poor, illiterate. They're not used to democracy. They're Roman Catholics, Orthodox Catholic, or Jews. They lived in poor ethnic neighborhoods called ghettos. For example, Little Italy or Little China. Statue of Liberty in New York City. It was given to us from France for our 100th year birthday, since our birthday is July 4, 1776. 1876 would be 100 years. A beacon of hope for immigrants coming to the United States from Europe. Restricted immigration. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 banned all Chinese from coming to America due to job competition on the West Coast and racism against Asians. Ellis Island in New York City and Angel Island in San Francisco became immigration processing centers. They rejected criminals, the mentally ill, and sick with communicable diseases. Prior to the establishment of these immigration centers, anyone could come to America at any time. Nativism. Nativism is people that do not like immigrants. The reasons behind nativism was, number 1, they took our jobs. Labor unions were against immigration oftentimes because they viewed the immigrants as competition for jobs. 2, prejudice against Catholics and Jews, so religious prejudice against these groups. 3, social Darwinism. This is one of the things we learned about in class, one of the philosophies of the Gilded Age. Social Darwinism viewed immigrants as biologically inferior. This is very akin to racism. And then 4, immigrants were blamed for economic depressions. Urbanization, the growth of cities. It's linked heavily to industrialization, the growth of factories. Urbanization, the changes in the nature of cities. So the Gilded Age cities were different than prior cities or antebellum American cities. You had new inventions that made it transportation better. For example, this created the streetcar cities. Urban transport, trolleys, railroads, and subways replaced walking cities, where you basically had to live close enough to where you worked to walk to it. Steel bridges such as the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City made transportation even better. The wealthy moved to the outskirts of the cities, leaving the poor people in the city center. They moved to the suburbs. Skyscrapers made out of steel. They're over 10 stories tall. They have to have Otis elevators because nobody wants to walk up more than 10 flights of stairs. That's a true story. Ethnic neighborhoods. slums, ghettos, tenement housing, small windowless rooms, dumbbell tenements, overcrowding, filth, diseases, and crime. There's all sorts of problems in the inner city. Residential suburbs, this is where the middle class and the rich would go to get away from all the bad things that were happening in the downtown urban centers. They use new transportation systems to live in houses outside the city with yards, less pollution, which is very different from Europe, where the rich people stayed in the city centers and the poor people went out to the suburbs. Political machines and political bosses. Political machines, tightly organized groups of corrupt officials that controlled city government by giving out government jobs. Any government job is called civil service in exchange for votes. This is known as the spoil system, which we learned about previously in antebellum America. It was introduced by Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren to provide a way for the common man to have access to government jobs. Ruled over by a boss, for example, Boss Tweed, controlled the Tammany Hall machine in New York City and became a millionaire through graft, fraud, and bribery. Awakening and reform. All these bad things on the inside started to get people to want to fix it. They started with books of social criticism like H. George, Progress and Poverty, and E. Bellamy, Looking Backwards. Settlement houses, Jane Addams starts the Hull House to help immigrants to assimilate to American culture. The social gospel was another philosophy of the Gilded Age. It applied Christian principles to the social problems caused by industrialization, immigration, and urbanization. It was started by W. Rauschenbusch, who worked in Hell's Kitchen and inspired others to do the same. The social gospel inspired things like the Salvation Army and new religions like Christian Science. Another reform movement was voting rights for women. Women were still disappointed for not getting voting rights after the Civil War, and their leaders were Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Women also tried to get rid of alcohol through the temperance movement. Intellectual and cultural movements, education, growth of public taxpayer-funded schools, public schools, kindergartens. New colleges were founded, some by philanthropists, focusing on pragmatism, science, and math instead of the classics, literature, and rhetoric. Doctors and scientists and lawyers become respectable professions when prior to this they were not. W.E.B. Du Bois, that was the first African American to earn a doctorate from Harvard University during this time period. Literature and the arts, realism and naturalism. They reject the romanticism of antebellum America. Samuel Clemens, also known as Mark Twain, used realism in his novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Jack London used naturalism when he wrote The Call of the Wild. Painting. American painters used realism to paint scenes of urbanization and industrialization. This became known as the Ashcan School. Architecture. The most famous American architect at the time was Frank Lloyd Wright, who developed an organic style with long horizontal lines. Louis Sullivan designed skyscrapers. Music. Scott Joplin created the Maple Leaf Rag, the beginning of jazz, and there was also the marches of J.P. Sousa. Popular culture. Cheap newspapers was what people would read because they were like a penny a piece. Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst competed for customers by filling their papers with sensationalized stories of crime, disaster, scandal, and corruption to get people to read them, and lots of pictures too. Amusement. Drinking and talking at the local saloon were the fun thing to do. People could go to the theaters, see vaudeville, which is a creation of variety acts. There also was the creation of circuses, Barnum and Bailey's being the most famous, and also the Wild Wild West show of William Buffalo Bill Cody. Spectator sports. Boxing was the most popular at the time, but baseball becomes America's pastime. Football is developed on college campuses, and basketball was invented in the Midwest. Amateur sports. What people were doing for fun for sporty things was playing croquet, bicycling, golf, and tennis. This was mostly the middle upper class who could afford these things. And that, students, is all the notes over Chapter 18. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit too. Make sure you mash that like, add, and subscribe button and tell all your friends. If we don't get more than 25 subscribers, then I'm going to call it a day. Word out.